Hi, welcome to Founder of the Day. My name is Jason, and I am shooting my first video in the dark. Hopefully it works out. Seems like the lighting's alright. Let me know how you think in the comments. I just wanted to shoot this video because I was doing some research on William Davey, and I ended up reading a little bit about the curious election of 1812. And I just had to shoot a video about it because there are so many twists and turns involved. So I'll give you the rundown. Going into the election of 1812, James Madison is our president. Madison, just 5 months beforehand, the previous June, had declared war with Great Britain and started the War of 1812. So we are fresh coming into the first real war of our nation after the Revolution, of course, and not counting the quasi-war with France because it was just a quasi-war. But this is the first declared war, was just announced. On top of that, 2 months before that, in April, Vice President George Clinton had died in office. So Madison had selected a new running mate, one Elbridge Gerry. Now, Elbridge Gerry is a name many will recognize for the term gerrymandering from when he was governor of Massachusetts. Unfortunately, Elbridge Gerry, first of all, didn't like the gerrymandering. It was just done under his administration, despite his attempts to stop it, and had previously done a whole lot of founding. His name is on the Declaration of Independence. I believe it's on the Articles of Confederation, and Elbridge Gerry was at the Constitutional Convention, but was one of only 3 men who were in the room in the convention hall when the document was signed, who stood up and refused to sign it. Mostly because he had several complaints, but mostly because there was no Bill of Rights. So he was there. He was there for a whole lot of founding. And he is selected, despite not signing the Constitution, as the Democratic-Republican vice presidential candidate. Now, at this point, the Federalist Party was all but dead. There were still former Federalists around, of course, but throughout the Jeffersonian era and Madison's first term, the Democratic-Republicans had pretty much taken over. So in this election, it's actually Democratic-Republican versus Democratic-Republican. Madison's opponent is DeWitt Clinton. Now, DeWitt Clinton had already served as a United States Senator for New York. He would go on to be a very important governor of New York in the future. But at this point, he's serving as mayor of New York City and lieutenant governor of New York State while he's running for president of the United States. And what's very interesting is, as I said before, Madison's vice president had just died earlier that year, and that was George Clinton, who was the uncle of Madison's now opponent from within the same party in a race for president of the United States. So DeWitt Clinton's vice presidential candidate was Jared Ingersoll, who himself was a signer of the United States Constitution from Pennsylvania. Now, before we go any further, there were a few Federalist holdouts who just could not bear to vote for either Democratic-Republican, even though DeWitt Clinton was really the Federalists' Democratic-Republican, if that makes any sense. He was the most moderate, because he was from New York, which at the time was a very swing state. But those Federalist holdouts, they did nominate a candidate, and that candidate was Rufus King, who also was a signer of the United States Constitution. He was the Federalist candidate. He had previously, in the last 2 elections, in 1804 and 1808, been the vice presidential candidate for Charles Coatworth Pinckney, but again, at that point, the Federalists were already pretty dying out as a party, even back then. So Rufus King's running mate was William Richardson Davey, who also attended the Constitutional Convention. Now, Davey didn't sign the Constitution. He left for personal and business reasons about halfway through. Although he was a Federalist, he did support the Constitution, despite North Carolina being very not very in favor of the Constitution at first. And Davy's big claim to fame really was that he was involved heavily in the Great Compromise, also known as the Connecticut Compromise, where we decided to have the House of Representatives based on population, proportional representation, and the United States Senate based on 2 senators per state. Granted, since it was mostly Roger Sherman, and to a lesser degree, but also very much from Oliver Ellsworth, both of whom were from Connecticut. But let's not get too tied down on that. The outcome of this election is extraordinarily interesting also. Rufus King and Davy, the Federalists, got 0 electoral votes, to the surprise of no one. But the election did come a little bit closer than people might expect, because a lot of people were against this war that James Madison just declared, especially in the North. Especially in the North. What do you mean we're fighting a war with Great Britain again? It's only been 30 years. What are you doing? It was more or less the argument. Now, of course, James Madison does win his second term, and Elbridge Gerry becomes his vice president. Madison took 128 electoral votes to DeWitt Clinton's 89. So it was a pretty solid victory. Although the electoral votes don't take the whole number into account, Madison won by about 7,500 votes. That is not a lot in the popular vote. Granted, it was 140,000 to 132,500. So there were less than 300,000 voters. We know that at the time, many people who would be allowed to vote today were suppressed at the time. Not the argument we're getting into here, but we do have to keep that in mind, of course. What's very interesting is the vice presidential electoral votes. It turns out that 3 of the electors who voted for DeWitt Clinton decided not to vote for his vice presidential candidate, Jared Ingersoll. Instead, they voted for James Madison's vice presidential candidate, Elbridge Gerry. And therefore, President James Madison received 128 electoral votes, and Vice President Elbridge Gerry received 131 electoral votes. So technically, Elbridge Gerry received more electoral votes than the president he was vice president for. It's crazy, and I had to make a video about it because I didn't know who else to talk to. That being said, this is only about 10 years after the 12th Amendment was passed to make sure that the whole shenanigans between Jefferson and Burr, where whoever got the most votes became president, they didn't want that to happen again. And it's a good thing they did, because it looks like Elbridge Gerry might have accidentally beaten James Madison in the race. So that's all I'm going to say on this. If you have any questions about this or any other early elections in American history, leave a comment down below. Make sure you like and subscribe. As I said in previous videos, this is new. This is, I believe, the 5th video I'm shooting. There's mistakes, I'm sure. I need to correct the lighting a bit. This is, again, my first time at night. I think I look alright. You let me know. Thank you.